All right, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Bava Metzia Daf Yud Zayin and Yud Ches Amud Aleph up to the Mishnah on Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Again, similar sugyas, thick, difficult Gemaras, but we are going to navigate them well. We're 1/3 of the way down on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, starting with the words of Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan. And in this case, the Gemara presents the following case: Mana li biyadcha, you owe me money. V'hala omer. The other guy says, Ein l'cha biyadi klum, I don't owe you anything. Ve'edim eidin oso sheyesh lo, you who denied owing me anything, the edim nailed you. And then v'chazar v'amar parati. Yeah, no, edim, I understand what you're saying. You say I owe, but I actually already paid. The halacha is hochza kafran l'osa mama. With this exact flow of events, we treat you as hochza kafran. We presume that you are a liar. So let's capture the flow of events. I'm the plaintiff, I say you owe me money. You're the defendant, you say no, I don't. Edim come and say yes, you do to the defendants. And then the defendants say parati. In that case, you're huchzak kafran. And when you parse out the case into its finest parts, it's not that the plaintiff was strong and the defendant was not as strong. It's that the edim were strong and the defendant were not as strong. If it was just 1-to-1, a person could say parati, and that might well be believable. But with the addition and interjection of edim, because the edim are now a factor here, so therefore the person is a huchzak kafran. And we have an exact replica of this that happened in real life. Kihad de Shabsai Berei de Rav Marinos, unique name. Kasavla Lakalse, he wrote in a star to his daughter-in-law, Itztala, a particular type of coat, Demilsa, Biksuvasa, Vikibla Ale, and it was received. Everybody knew what happened at the time. And then, convenient for her, for the father-in-law, Irkas Ksubasa, she lost her ksuba. That's not good. The fur coat that the shver wanted to put in for the kala, maybe it worked out nicely because he stole it from his wife. So it was probably not a good thing to bequeath to the daughter-in-law. Nevertheless, she lost her ksuba. What happens? Omar, and then all of a sudden the father-in-law is like, well, I think I'm going to be all off scot-free here. Lo hayud dvarim me'olam. Says the Gemara, that's not true. Asu sadeh, there were witnesses. Ve'amre, they said in kosavla. Yes, we saw. We were the signatories. We saw that this was the case, that the father-in-law in fact signed over the coat to the daughter-in-law. L'sof amar lahu parate. The father-in-law kind of caught red-handed, was like, oh, but yeah, and I paid. I gave it to her already. So the halacha is also l'kamed Rav Chia. Amarle huchzakta kafran l'osi. This flow of events, we don't believe you anymore. We don't believe you anymore. You're not just plaintiff versus defendant, but we've added an edim against you. I don't know if what I'm saying is correct. It's not really 2 against 1. It's not that you have the plaintiff plus the edim against the defendant. It's just that the edim are stark and the edim are more powerful. Trei kameya, like you're up against a brick wall. That brings us to the 2 dots, 5 lines before the wide lines on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Amar of Avin, Amar of Ilah, Amar of Yochanan. Hayachayev lechavero shvua. Let's say that there was a shvua that I owed you. The Amar nishbati. And instead of making the shvua, I claimed I already made the shvua. And then, very similar to the previous case, except that here we're talking about me owing you a shvua, not me owing you money. So the halacha is huchza kafran l'osa shvua. Seems to be the exact same din when it comes to money as when it comes to a shvua. So the Gemara says on the last of the short lines, Amruk Hamed Rabbi Abo, Amar Lahu, Misabre Milsa de Rabbi Avin. Rabbi Abo says, I understand Rabbi Avin's halacha shenischayv shvua bebezdin. I understand that when the edim interject themselves and say, Phil, you lied. You did not make the shvua that the plaintiff said you made. And then I said, yes, I did. So that's only true if the original shvua that I was chayev was nischayev bebezdin. Aval chayev atzma shvua, chayev atzma shvua is actually probably more grammatically correct, is that if I obligated myself in the shvua, not bezdin, so then ne'eman. Oh, so here we have a split. Here's how it works. Plaintiff says, plaintiff said something to me, and now I have to make a shvua. So if it is that I now have to make a shvua, if the shvua was something that Bezdin obligated me to do, and then I say nishbati, and then the edim come, and then I say nishbati again, So then I'm huchzak kafran. But if I say on my own, no, I promise, let's just say, Mark, I promise, I'm going to make a shvua. So Mark's like, okay, make a shvua. And then I say nishbati, and then Adim come and they say, no, you didn't. And then I say nishbati. But there it's different. Why is it different if Bezdin is mechayev me a shvua versus when I'm mechayev myself a shvua? And this is something that we're not used to in our world. We don't make this distinction. But the Gemara says that if I bring a shvua upon myself, people do that all the time, but it's not necessarily like red-handed. It might just be that I want to procrastinate. It might be that I want to wait till I get money in. So, for example, if I say, Mark, I know I owe you $1,000, but I paid you already. That lie, granted, it's not true, but it's not the same thing as Bezdin being mechayev me and then I lie. When Bezdin's mechayev me and I lie, I'm instantly huchzak kafra. If I bring the shvua upon myself, then I might have had an ulterior motive in the shvua, which is I didn't have my paychecks coming in Friday, so I said parati or nishbati, whatever it is. We don't make this distinction nowadays. We would call a lie a lie. We would never make this distinction. But nevertheless, the Gemara attempts to make this distinction. And on the second of the wide lines on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, "Hadrua kamed Rabbi Avin." They threw back this chakira of Rabbi Abahu, that there's a difference between a shvua that was obligated based on Bezdin versus one that was obligated by oneself. Amar lahu onanami bebezdin amri. He said, I would say in both cases that that's true. That no matter what your ulterior motive lie might not necessarily make you into a huchzak kafran. And it's marnami, this was expressly written in the Amoraim. Amar of Avin, Amar Rabbi Lo, Amar of Yochanan. Hayachayev l'chaveru shvua bebezdin. This is explicit now. Before we didn't have this part. That when it is bezdin, it's a true story. That's more of a shiur. But when it's a shiur of yourself, when it's a shvua that you brought upon yourself, there you're not necessarily considered to be a liar. I don't know why you're not considered to be a liar, but you're not considered to be a liar. I mean, the Gemara svara was that people do this, that people say these lies because we're trying to, again, kick the can down the road for my chiyuv, paychecks coming in on Friday. Okay. 100%. Of course. But we're pressure testing the system. Like what we're trying to determine is where is the line when halacha thinks you're a liar. If you would have said that, we couldn't pressure test the system, right? Because that's just being straight up. And really, we learn a huge chiddush that if you accepted the shvua upon yourself, and then you lied, you're still not a liar, halachically. We still say that it's possible that you have an ulterior motive in your dishonesty, and it's not a pure lie, but you're just kicking the can down the road because you're waiting for payroll, you're waiting for another transaction to happen, you're waiting for money from the bank, whatever.
And there's no consequence to doing that?
I mean, you're a liar. But halachically, you're not a huchzak kafran where we assume that you are being combative about your payment. We don't yet assume that you're not willing to pay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are other issues, but you're not yet a kafran in this particular case. And 2/3 of the way down, 5 lines down into the wide lines, Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yochanan. Hamotzei shtar chov b'shuk. Let's always remember that we're learning about finding objects. That if a person finds a shtar chov in the marketplace, we've been learning about a henpek, that a henpek is where it's very clear that this has been a validated document by Bezdin. The kasubo zmano bo bayom, and it's dated today. So let's say I make a deal with Tex in the morning, 9 a.m. on Sunday morning on whatever the Hebrew date is. What do we have? It's the 7th of Adar. So then, fine, we make a deal. I borrow $10,000 from Tex at 9 a.m. and it has today's date on it. So the halacha is yachziru l'baylim. So if somebody finds it, it says Phil borrowed this money from Tex, and then my father finds it. He says, Tex, look what I found. Oh, that's appropriate. Now, imishum, if for any of the previous concerns that we had, they won't apply here. Imishum kasav lilvos velo lava. If you want to say that maybe we shouldn't have returned it to the bailim, because perhaps I should have been concerned that maybe Tex and I were just shooting the breeze. We were talking about a loan, but the money didn't actually try. That's not possible. Hakasu bohenbek. There we had it's Makuyam. Bezdin said that this transaction actually happened. So that should not be a factor in regards to not giving it back to Tex, not giving it back to the Malva. And imishum piro, and if your concern is that perhaps Phil paid back Tex already, the priya bas yoma lo chayshina. That's not how loans work. Nobody, I mean, it's rare. Or maybe it happens now. I don't know. People don't usually borrow. What?
pay the same.
Right, to repay a loan the same day. The Gemara says that's not common. That's not common. Even if you have a loan, I borrowed money once from someone in my family to hold me over for like a few days. Okay, so I made sure it was in the bank a little earlier than I needed, and I paid them back a few days after the transaction that I needed to come in took place. And Shalom Al Yisrael, they did a mitzvah d'oraisa b'im kesef tal v'asami, and I paid them back whatever our term. But same day, it's just usually not like that. It could happen. All of our transfers are digital, basically, so they take more time. But maybe back in the day, I had someone coming to my office at 12. So I said to text, I need 10,000 rubles at 11 a.m. I'll pay you back at 1. Possible. So the Gemara says, if you're concerned about that, Priya Bas Yoma Lo Chayshina. Amar Le Rav Zeir Larvasi. Mi Amar Rav Yochanan Hachid. Does Rav Yochanan really say that paying back the same day is uncommon? After all, Ha'athu de Amris Mishmei de Rav Yochanan. Rav Zeira, you said, Rav Asi, you said in the name of Rav Yochanan that that's not the case. Shtar Shalava Bo Upirao. If there was a shtar where I, Phil, borrowed from tax and I paid it back, Eino Choser, Vilova, you can't repeat using the document, Shekvar Nimchal Shibuda, because if tax lends me money, there's a shibud on my karka to pay him back the loan. If I default, he can go to my property down the block, he can take my house. But once I pay him back the loan, then by definition, when I give him back the 10,000 rubles that I borrowed, the shibud, the lien on my property that tax had, is no longer valid. So said
That's not, it actually is. Today, there are loans that are going all day long, in and out, in and out. Anybody who's buying stock on margin, selling stock on margin, any day trader, it's literally
right.
every second.
Correct. But over here, we're talking about a piece of parchment that says at 9 a.m. Phil lent.
And you went to base.
We'll,
Right in between, right.
right. We're gonna discuss
Case, right.
the previous case with the henpeck pashut. Yeah, we started at the CRC at 9 a.m. and they said valid document. They watched me they watched you give me the money, and then I don't know. You dropped it in Old Orchard, and then somebody picked it up. They're like, text says you don't want to lose this document. It's dated for today, and he gives it right back to you. Mutter, says the Gemara. That's fine. But over here we have a different concern, and we have to analyze this piece of Gemara because in this statement of Rav Yochanan, the case was where I had a shtar, shalava bo pirao. I borrowed 10,000 rubles at 9 a.m. and I paid back. Eino chozer v'lo bo. You can't use the same parchment again. Shekvar nimchal shibuda, because the lien on my property is no longer valid. Why? Because the shtar is over. We've already fulfilled the terms and conditions of my shtar. 9 a.m. borrow, 9 p.m. payback. So you can't reuse the document. So says the Gemara, Emas, what are the conditions of Rav Yochanan's case just now? This is, I believe this, I wonder what the article says about this. Chara, I think it was supposed to be uliyom machara. I think it was supposed to be tomorrow. The word chara in modern Hebrew is a curse word. And I think over here it's supposed to be uliyom macharas. Is he correct over there? I don't see a correction here.
I also have two separate.
Yoma Chara. What does it say in the art scroll by Yoma Chara? Where Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Do you have there?
Take a look at Rashi. Gotta see this. Rashi says, don't make that mistake.
Yeah.
Two separate words.
What's Chara?
Uliyom acharav. The kids are so friendly. It means uliyom acharav.
I have a footnote on the Rashi.
Means machar tomorrow. Yom Achar is the day after.
The Gemara v'Rashi Dfusim Yeshanim Uliyom Achara is one word.
This says nothing.
Rashi was correcting the old.
Rashi.
Rashi was correcting the Dfusim Yeshanim.
Yeah.
That's what he says. What does it say there? Doesn't say a word. It keeps the words separate. Yoma and then Chara. Okay, so we know what it means. We know it. It means the next day.
Subsequent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, not subsequent. Sorry.
Yeah. Subsequent. Mark, do you know what subsequent means? Yeah. Yeah, we'll go out to lunch. You and I are gonna go out to lunch subsequently. It's gonna be amazing. See you tomorrow. Okay, so anyways, says the Gemara, Ilema, if the case was talking about the next day, that can't be. My irya shekvar nimchal shibudo. Then why would your concern have been that the lien is no longer applicable? You should have a more fundamental issue with this shtar. The issue should be 20 lines from the bottom, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Tepuk de havale mukdam. The date on the shtar is no longer applicable. Why? It's not. We have a rule about this. Shtarei chov hamukdamin psulin. We learned about this already. I don't even know where. Let me just look it up because I don't remember. In this Masechta? No. Rosh Hashanah Daf Beis. We didn't learn Shvius. It's Rosh Hashanah Daf Beis. So the Gemara says it's a shtar mukdam. This you can't use this document. Forget your issue of the lien. It's a secondary issue. There's a primary issue. Elalav, it must be biyome. It must be that in this case of Rav Yochanan, where the case was that I borrowed 10,000 from Tex at the CRC at 9 a.m. and I paid him back later that day. Says the Gemara, we don't repeat it. It must be biyome. Alma, what do we see? Proi in biyome. We see that people do taka pay back the same exact day. What do you mean we don't pay back? We said 10 lines ago in the previous case. Says the Gemara, Amar Lei, Rav Asi responded, Mika amina de lo piroi klal. I'm not saying that nobody ever pays back on the same day. Pasha, that's not what I mean. I'm just saying lo shchichi inshi de pare biyome kamin. I'm just saying it's not common. It doesn't. Everybody relax. Relax. Stop bringing me Mari Makomos. It's just not common. It's just, the person's a little uptight. Reb Zera couldn't handle the possibility as to it's uncommon. It's uncommon. Now, when we started this little piece of the sugya 5 lines down, we gave the case of Rav Asi Amar Rav Yochanan. We said that there was the case of the henpeck, and it was a one day document. And there we said Yachziru leBailim. Rav Kahana has a totally different take on this case. Rav Kahana Amar Kshechayev Modeh. What does it mean, Yachzir leBailim? Let's get the case clear again. Looking back up 5 lines into the wide lines, the Gemara there said that if, let's say, my dad finds a shtar in Old Orchard, and it's a shtar chov that between me and Tex, the Kasubo Henpek, and it shows that Tex and I were at the CRC at 9 a.m., and it talks about today, the din is Yachzir leBailim. Rav Kahana says, what's the case? And now we're going back down, we're halfway through the thick lines. Rav Kahana says, it's Kshechai Moda. That's when I say, yeah. Yeah, 100%. I owe Tex 10,000 rubles. I agree. So says the Gemara, if everyone's in agreement, Tex says, you owe me $10,000. And I say, you're right. So what are you bothering making a statement in the Gemara? That's regular run-of-the-mill stuff. I don't need a Daf Gemara and Bava Metzia to tell me about that. So says the Gemara, must be Ma'udetema. You might have thought Hamifra Pare. Really, the money was paid. And why is it that I might have claimed lo perate mishum de kaboy mahader lemispa be zman achrisi ulifshite de sifra chayesh? I wanted to use the same exact loan document again, but save myself money on the cost of a scribe writing a new parchment. The blessings of a printer. The ink is still the most expensive ink on the planet. It's the most expensive liquid on the planet, basically, one of. Who cares? We write it off. You want to print something in my house? I don't charge you. Come over, come print. But back in the day, you had to hire someone who had the quill, who had the ink, who had the skill, who was a Talmid Chacham, who knew how to write. There was a lot going on there. And it cost a few rubles. So that maybe the borrower said, I want to use this document again. Tex and I are going to have constant loans going back and forth. Says the Gemara, perhaps you would have thought that was valid. Kamashmal, and it's not valid. The Imkain, had it been okay, then Malve Gufei Lo Shabak. Tex would never have allowed that document to be recirculated. Why not? Savar Shame Be Rabbanan and Mifsadeli, because the rabbis might hear about it and cancel it because it just looks really shady. The same document with the old date used over and over again, it doesn't look good. But again, the shtar had a date on it, so you have to write it in a way where, you could write it differently. But that wasn't our case here. Here was where we wrote it biyome. And I paid it. I paid you back. The transaction was done. So if I were a posek and I'm not, I would have said, as long as you write your shtar in a way that's clear as to what the expectations are, then you won't have to worry. Everything will be okay. That's what I would have thought. Says the Gemara, all of this is wonderful, but ma'ishna mehadetnan. We learned the Mishnah on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis Matzah Shtarei Chov. This was what started all of this extremely difficult pieces of Gemara. And soon we're going to get to a new Mishnah, Baruch Hashem. Although I don't know how hard it is, so maybe it's harder. I don't know. We'll get there and we'll find out together. But why is what we just learned in the name of Rabbi Yochanan any different than the Mishnah we learned prior? That if there are shtarei chov that are found, if there is achrayas nechasim, then lo yachzir. And what did we say over there? We said the same thing that Rav Kahana just said. Oh, so now we see a stira. Over here by Rav Yochanan, Rav Kahana gave Pshat and Rav Yochanan and said, the case is where Shechayev Modeh. Says the Gemara, whoa, hold on one second. On Daf Yud Beis and Beis, we had a Mishnah, we gave that answer too, but the halacha was lo yachzir, that the person who finds it should not return the shtar in all circumstances. If there was achrayas on that shtar, you should not be returning it. So says the Gemara, umishum shema kosav lilbos b'nisan v'lo levat tishrei. If you want to say that there was a concern that maybe the document was planned in Nisan, but the money didn't change hands until 6 months later, and v'asi lemitra b'kuchos b'nisan v'at tishrei shelo kedin, and we're afraid that someone might get messed over because the document indicates that, we had a din that was happening, but it didn't happen yet. But then velo amrina diim kain malva gufelo shavik. Then we wouldn't have then said malva gufelo shavik to amar le. Why not? So shtarach reina betishrei. The dilma shame rabbanan mifsadele. Why don't we say on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis what we just said to Rav Kahana? Says the Gemara, Amre. The difference is like this. Hasam mishum de islay ravcha de katarif lekuchos minisan ve'ad tishrei. There is a little bit of a sneaky benefit that during those 6 months he actually could collect. A person could actually collect against that document potentially. However, and therefore, he lets it stand because there's a chance he could collect money. But hacha, in our case of Rabbi Yochanan with the henpick, since the clock is only a day on the shtar, as Rabbi Yochanan presented, it's a 1-day document. There's no way to compare the two cases. The case on Yud Beis and Mid Beis is a 6-month discussion. The case right here on Yud Zayin and Mid Aleph with Rabbi Yochanan is a 1-day discussion. Eino doma. The cases are not comparable. Says the Gemara, Bishtar shenimchal shibudo lo shavik. That when there's a shtar, like the case of Rav Yochanan, where I paid back tax on the same day, and therefore the lien on my property on Chase Avenue is no longer valid, so then no one in Texas shoes would let that document stand, because the Chachamim wouldn't like it, Bezin might nix it. That brings us to the 2 dots on the very bottom line of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. The next Amud is shorter, and Amir Hashem will get to the next Mishnah by 9:30. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba Amar Rav Yochanan. Hatoin achar ma'aseh bezdin. Don't turn the page yet because we need a Rashi. Hatoin achar ma'aseh bezdin. What is a ma'aseh bezdin? Rashi says Hatoin achar ma'aseh bezdin. 5 lines from the bottom. Davar shutnai bezdin. Things that are considered to be a condition of bezdin. Kigon ksuba, umazon ha'isha v'habanos. Hatoin v'amar parati shelo be'edim lo amar klum. If someone says that they paid and there were no edim, even if there was no document, doesn't matter. If there's no ksuba, the woman still gets a ksuba. So now let's learn this din. All of these things that Rashi says, the ksuba, mazon isha ubanos, all of these things which are called ma'aseh bezdin. Turning to the top of Yud Zayin of the Beis, the Gemara says, lo amar klum. We don't care what you say. My taima kol ma'aseh bezdin k'ma denokit shtar b'yadei dami. Very important halachic principle, one that requires a lot of time to fully unpack, but in a balabatisha way, in a Daf Yomi kind of a way, we could understand it a little bit. That these things are bigger than the realities that you have to give a ksuba. You have to feed your wife and sons in a case of divorce. These things are not negotiable. They're like baseline human values. When a woman gets divorced, she gets a ksuba. You lost your ksuba? Yeah, but there was a ksuba. The institution of ksuba was to protect a woman. She can't find it, she gets 200 zuz in a divorce. So says the Gemara. Amar le Reb Chia bar Abba le Reb Yochanan. V'lo Mishnah seinu hizu. What, you're teaching me a chiddush, Reb Yochanan? Didn't you learn Mishnayos in Zilberman's? Everybody knows. Hotzia get the eini mo ksuba go ksubasa. This is black on white. This is a straight up a Mishnah in Maseches ksubos, and there it says that if there is a get but there is no ksuba, halacha l'maisa she can collect a ksuba. Just to repeat Ladina, and I've said this many times, and I'll keep saying it as it comes up. If a couple does not know where their ksuba is, they should not be intimate until they find their ksuba. People have ksubas rewritten all the time. Fires, water damage, I have no idea where it is, I moved, I threw it out, I put it in shemis. Every excuse has happened. If you don't know where your ksuba is, go to Bezdin and have them rewrite a ksuba. Renew your vows. Make it romantic. It'll be great. That- She gets her ksuba. She gets her. It's not because I'm not saying this because of getting the ksuba. It's a side din that if a couple doesn't know where their ksuba is, they should not be together because she's not protected. She is protected. Al t'nai bezdin, but it's not the right way to do it. You should have the document. The institution of ksuba is a din derabanan. So the halachos are a little gamish. They're not like super clear, but we do know, at least according to this version of the Gemara, that Hotzia get ve'enimo ksuba go ksuba. So you're right that she's still protected, but it's not the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do.
So we should not assume our wife knows where it is. We should make sure she does.
Correct. You should just ask, by the way, do you know where our ksuba is to make sure you know where it is.
Frame, right?
So if your artwork was the official one, then yes, but a lot of ksubas on the wall are artwork. Or I'll give you a better one. Let's say a couple got married when they weren't so from, and now they're from, and their ksuba's trash. They have to get a ksuba. They have to get remarried. They have to Harad Mekudesh Esli, whatever. They have to get remarried. They have to. That's not pasha. That's what? Why? If he's the same wife, they're not getting divorced. It's just No, there we have an assumption in the Rishonim that ein adam osa be'ilah so be'ilah znos. We assume that when a couple is together. Well, what is that when you get when you?
It's what we call common law marriage.
They needed their abundance.
Yeah, but it's not. Who's the Eidei Yichud? Who's the Eidei anything?
Everybody see them going in their house together.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Eidus proper. I thought you were talking about Eidus proper. I think like Yidden.
So everybody's
Yeah.
seen them for 10
Yeah,
years,
yeah. We
acting like
right.
husband and
By the way, before Matan Torah, that's kind of sort of what happened before Matan Torah, where there was no formality. Like the Rambam speaks about this in Hilchos Yisuri B. I think in the early parts of in the early Prakim, I think he talks about that. Yeah,
wife. Somebody else
yeah,
got
yeah.
it.
You basically bring someone home and say, "This be my wife.
Say that,
This
that's
be
what
my wife."
Everybody says.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, one should just know where their ksuba is, or I should say, a woman has to know where her ksuba is. A husband is obligated to pay under the circumstances of a necessary divorce. So says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan, your whole din of kol ma'aseh bezdin lo amar klum, nunu. That's a Mishnah in ksubas. You've taught me nothing. So Rav Yochanan says, Amar le ilav de deloy lach chaspa. If I didn't pick up the pottery, lo mishkachas margani satusa. You wouldn't have found the pearl underneath. Meaning, my comment gave you pshat in the Mishnah and in the Mishnah and Ksubas. You didn't know how to learn the Mishnah and Ksubas till I said what I said. So really, you could reverse engineer. Maybe Rav Yochanan was learning Maseches Ksubas with the boys, and he said, "I'm giving you pshat in the Mishnah on where is this Mishnah on Ksubas Daf Peches," and he says pshat is that Kol Ma'aseh Bezdin Lo Amar Klum, that you get the Ksuba no matter what. It says the Gemara, Amar Abaye. Now remember, Abaye and Rav Yochanan were 2+ generations apart. Abaye was 4th generation of Amoraim, and Rav Yochanan overlapped with Rav, though he was slightly younger. Rav lived in like the 220s because Rebbe died in 220, and he had already been a Talmud. So I don't know what year he was born in, but the late 100s, whatever. Abaye was a little bit later. I don't know if they overlapped, but Abaye was looking at this. He's like, my Marganisa, what pearl did you teach me? Dilma, perhaps the Mishnah in Ksubas was b'makom she'en kosen ksuba askinan. To get Hainu Ksubas, no chiddush at all. We saw this in Maseches Ksubas as well, that there was a time in Jewish history where it was not the standard to write a Ksuba. And therefore, under those circumstances, if it was a time when the Ksuba wasn't written, you haven't taught me a blessed thing. That was baseline halacha, that when there was no Ksuba, you collect. That's not a chiddush of kol ma'aseh bezdin lo amar klum. You haven't taught me anything. They don't write a Ksuba anyways. That's always how a divorce works. You give the divorce papers, and it gives you 200 zuz. That's just how it works. No chiddush. Aval perhaps b'makom shekosvin ksuba, but maybe the Mishnah in Ksubas was talking about where there's no ksuba written. But had it been that it was a place where a ksuba was written, then in akita ksuba kavya and ilo lo gavya. And maybe if in fact there was a ksuba, then great, and if not, then not. And therefore, the din of Rav Yochanan that kol ma'aseh bezdin hatoin achar ma'aseh bezdin lo amar klum is actually not correct. So that was a good argument by Abaye, but but Hadar Amar Abaye, about 8-9 lines down, almost halfway down in Yud Zayin Amud Beis, Abaye undoes his own argument here. By the way, it sounds like a great argument. He saw the Mishnah on Ksubas Peches Abaye, and he says, "What pearl are you teaching me? If the Mishnah on Ksubas was talking about a generation in which they did not write a Ksuba anyways, you haven't taught me anything." So Abaye recants. Abaye says, Hadar Amar Abaye, he looks in the mirror and says, this is not right. Lav milsahi de amri. What I said doesn't make any sense. If in fact the Mishnah and Ksubis on Daf, Peches was talking about a place where they did not write a ksuba, and the get was the ksuba. Aval, but had it been that it was b'makom shekosvin ksuba inikita ksuba gavya ilolo gavya, that had there been a ksuba, yes, and if not, had that been true, then we still would have been stuck. Almana min ha'erusin b'mai gavya. How would an almana from Erusin have collected? There would not yet have been a ksuba. It wasn't the standard that a woman would have gotten a ksuba by Erusin. They would have gotten it by nisuin. So says the Gemara, it might have been be'edei misas bal, that when there are witnesses that the husband died, then she would collect money. Says the Gemara, liton, in such a case, velema pirate, then in that case they can say that it was paid. And if that were to have been true by an almana min ha'erusin, that someone could claim parate, that's a problem. Imkein maho'ilu chachamim b'takanasa. That can't be the case, because then we would have had a scenario where the claim against an almana min ha'erusin would have been one that would have left her without a ksuba. And if that's true, then what was the whole point of the takana of the chachamim to have a ksuba? And therefore, Abaye recants his argument, and therefore, what Rav Yochanan said is correct, that we had the chaspa and we had the shtara. Rav Yochanan's comment of hatoin achar ma'ase bezdin lo amar klum, that's the chaspa, and really what he was doing was uncovering how to properly understand the Mishnah in Ksubis Peichas. The Gemara says 2/3 of the way down on the second of the wide lines, Amar le Mark Shisha berei Rav Chizda le Rav Ashi. Once we mentioned Ve'almana min ha'erusin, we're going to dig in a little bit. Ve'almana min ha'erusin de isla ksuba min alon. How do we know that a woman who is an almana from erusin, how do we know that she gets paid her 200 zuz? If you want to say that if it's from the following Mishnah that we saw in Ksubis 1, 2, 3 times, that if a woman becomes widowed or she gets divorced, Bein min ha'erusin uvein min hanisuin, we don't care when it is that she gets divorced. Goves hakol, look at this language. Goves hakol, she collects everything. Maybe that's not a case where we talk about Maisa Bezdin and we say she gets a ksuba even if there wasn't one. Perhaps this was a scenario where there was one. And if you say that, well, if it was a generation where people were writing ksubas, why did you bother writing this Mishnah? Dvarim pshutim, that if a woman, that her husband or fiance died or she got divorced, obviously she'd get a ksuba. There's a written ksuba in front of us. Says the Gemara, great point, but there is an upside to speaking about a case that is with a written ksuba, and that is la'afuke midar Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. The Tanakama over here, 5 lines from the bottom, when it says nis armla o nis garsha, that goves akol, that Mishnah which is found, we'll just pick one Mari Malcolm on Ksubas Mem Zayin. There we had to preclude that this Tana holds of, or I should say that he doesn't hold Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. What did Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah hold? To Amar shelo kasavla ela almanas lekonsa. He only wrote the ksuba on condition that they would actually marry, and therefore, according to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and this is a very unfortunate scenario, a man writes a ksuba when they get engaged, but the din of the ksuba only kicks in once they actually fully get married, which means she actually, according to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, would not get a ksuba if her husband died while they were engaged, if her fiance died. We don't paskin like that. So the Brisa was talking, even in a case where the ksuba was written, we just want to preclude us from thinking that we hold like Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, therefore it's tzricha. And dekanami, we could actually make an inference that this is correct. Dekatani, what does the Brisa say? It's a Mishnah, the Mishnah from Ksubas Mem Zayin. What does it say? Goves hakol. It says you collect everything. What does everything mean? So it says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom. If you want to say it's at a time where a shtar was written, a ksuba was written for the woman, Hainu dekatani goves hakol, I could understand you're referencing all of the various payments in the ksuba, the basics, the extras, the tosefes, everything. Like we have Bahosif lo min dilhon me'azu sacha kol masayim zekukin kesef tzarov. That's kind of approximately the language in our ksuba. So it says the Gemara, that's goves hakol. Eliyamris de lo kosavla. But if there was nothing ever written, Says the Gemara, my goves hakol. What is kol? It's not goves hakol. There's not like the basics and the tosefes. It's whatever the normal is. Mana umasayim hu de isle. It has to be that the language of goves hakol is talking about a generation where they do have a ksuba. Because then we could say goves hakol. Oh, there's a mana over here in the ksuba, another mana over there, and another this. And I threw in the coat, and I threw in a cow, and I threw in a couch. Great. That's what goves hakol means. But the language of goves hakol doesn't work if there's no ksuba. So therefore, looking back, it must be that the Mishnah from Mem Zayin is a beautiful raya to a source that we would therefore pay an armala if her husband, fiance, were to die during their engagement. Says the Gemara, the Ella, Vidatani Reb Chia bar Ami. Hold on one second. We have a brisa, Ishto Arusa. Let's say that a woman was engaged and then one of them dies. Lo onein v'lo metamela, and let's say the husband is a kohen, so the husband has no aninus. They're only engaged, right? I don't mean engaged like our version of engaged. Will you marry me? I mean harat mekudeshesli. They're halachically engaged with Adam properly. They're engaged. They're just not fully married yet. So says the Gemara, in that state, lo onein, that between the death of the woman and the burial of the woman, the fiance, the groom does not have to be an onen. He can't be an onen. He has to put on tefillin that day. And if he's a kohen, he cannot become tamei meisfer. This is not one of the seven. Not only that, this woman, if the man dies, lo onenes v'lo matamelo. Fascinating line, v'lo matamelo. She couldn't even become tamei for him. That's what Rashi says. Rashi says, lav mishum kahuna ka'amar, dein kahanos muzharos al tuma dechsi b'nei Aaron. Ella ena zakuka latamelo. She's just not obligated. She doesn't have to take care of him. Lo kohenes v'lo yisraelis. She mitzvah liis asek b'shiva meisei mitzvah ha'amurim b'parsha dechsiv lo yitama v'tanya lo yitama mitzvah v'im lo rotza mitamano so al korcho. Fine. Lamaisa. The point is not that we are concerned. She's not muzheres on Isser Tuma. She's a female. That's not a problem. But she doesn't have a mitzvah to take care of the mace unless it's a mace mitzvah. But a regular burial sounds a little cold, like, look, we've been engaged for a while, but take care. Let somebody else bury you. Not my problem. Let's continue with the brisa. Mesa, if she dies, Eina Yorsha. If she dies, there's no Yerusha. Mace who? But if he dies, what do we see? Govek Suvasa. So we do see that she does in fact collect money. So says the Gemara, what was going on over here? They were engaged. Says the Gemara, Dilma de Kasabla, maybe there was a ksuba that was written between them. Says the Gemara, so what? V'chitema de Kasabla Maila Memra. Says the Gemara, what does that come to teach us? If in fact it was Kasabla, that makes perfect sense as to why she would have to collect, she would get to collect her ksuba. That's obvious. So Zog the Gemara responds, no, Mesa Eina Yorsha Isrichale. We needed that case that even though the ksuba was written, it will not function as any support for Yorshim. The Yorshim might say, hey, she's got a ksuba. Give me the money. The Gemara says, no, that ksuba is not for you. The ksuba does not help at all. It says the Gemara, going back to our discussion about Abaye. Ela Abaye, migufa de masnisan kahadarbe. Abaye was retorting to himself about what he saw in the Mishnah. The Isal Kadaitach, had we been discussing a case b'makom she'ein kosvin, ksuba askinan. Had we been talking about a place where no ksuba was written, the get hainu ksubasa, where the get would function as a ksuba, atu get mana masayim ksibe. You look inside a get in a place where a ksuba isn't written, you rely upon the get to pay you. Where does it say $200 in a get? 200 zuz. That's just not what it says in a get. It just says you're divorced on this day, this person from that city. Because the Chachamim had a principle that there is this din of ksuba, and even if there's no ksuba to be collected, so be it. It's as though the money is written. Well, then in that case, liton v'lema parati. That gives a lot of latitude to the Baal, to the divorcing husband, to say, I paid it. And if you want to say to the husband, well, if you paid it, you should have torn up the shtar. Amarlan, he could have argued, lo shavaktan, she won't let me tear up the document because Amra be'ena le'in subebe. She says, I might want to benefit from this document in another way. What does that line mean? Le'in subebe. to get married with it.
In order
To remarry
Yeah.
with the same document, lin subebe. Yeah. Very romantic. In the middle of a divorce. Maybe we should say back to the husband, well, you should have torn it in one spot. You should have written on the back of it, Gita denandikar anuhu. This get that I put a tear in, lo mishum de gita psulahu. This isn't to say that the get is puzzle. Ella ki hechi de lo tigbibe zimna achrisi. I just don't want this woman to be a leech and show up every 2 weeks and say, yomi eksuba, yomi eksuba, yomi eksuba. Says the Gemara, Atu called the migbe beveidina migbe. Not every case is in Bezdin where you have to have these types of considerations. There's like a little bit more of a normalcy as to how things happen. So all of these types of kneches that you're trying to come up with are not necessarily the case. And this goes back to explain the shita of Abaye in the middle of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. We'll stop right here. Mirza Hashem will pick up tomorrow with the Mishnah, a little bit more than halfway down on Yud Ches Amud Aleph, and we'll do our best to cover ground on the next blot and a half. Wishing you all a beautiful night.